The room was silent. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, throwing a dim yellow light on the cracked walls. He stood there, motionless, staring at nothing. Once, this man had a life full of noise, laughter, phone calls, meetings, dinners with friends. But now, only silence answered him. The world that once celebrated his presence had turned its back. This was not how his story was supposed to end. People who saw him months ago would never believe this was the same man. Back then, he was respected, admired, and full of confidence. He had a stable job, good income, and friends who surrounded him. His life looked perfect from the outside. But life has its own plans, and one small moment can change everything. It all began with a single phone call. He was sitting in his office, busy with papers and numbers, when his manager entered with a strange expression. No smile, no warmth, only cold words. "I'm sorry, but the company has decided to let you go." At first, he thought it was a mistake. A joke, maybe. But no, it was real. The job he had given his years, the place where he worked late nights and early mornings, was gone in a single sentence. He walked out of the building that day carrying a small box filled with his belongings. A photo frame, a coffee mug, a few files. It felt unreal. People passed by him, busy with their lives, while he stood frozen. The city around him was alive, but inside him, everything was dying. When he reached home, he tried to hide the truth. He told himself it was temporary, that he would find another job soon. But days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. No calls came back, no emails brought good news. Slowly, the money in his bank account began to vanish. And then came the betrayal. Friends he once trusted began to disappear. At first, they said, "Don't worry, everything will be fine." But soon, their voices faded. His phone, which once rang all the time, now stayed silent. Some ignored his messages, others gave excuses. The same people who once shared drinks, dinners, and laughter with him, now acted like they never knew him. The nights grew heavier. He would sit on his bed, staring at the ceiling, asking himself, "Why me? What did I do wrong?" The walls of his house felt like a prison. His confidence turned into fear. His dreams turned into dust. One evening, he opened his wallet and found only a few coins left. He laughed, but it was not the laugh of joy, it was the laugh of a broken man. He remembered how once he had taken money for granted, how he had spent without thinking. Now, even buying a simple meal felt like a challenge. On the streets, he walked with his head down. He did not want anyone to recognize him, to see the man he had become. Rain poured from the sky, soaking his clothes, but he did not care. In fact, he welcomed the rain. At least the rain could hide his tears. Each day felt like a battle. Each night felt like the end. And yet, inside him, there was still a small fire, though weak and almost dying. But for now, he was falling deeper into the darkness. He had lost his job. He had lost his friends. He had lost his peace. But little did he know, this was only the beginning. His life was about to break even more. The real storm was yet to come. The days after losing his job were like a chain reaction, one problem leading to another. What began as a single fall slowly turned into an avalanche. At first, he believed he could handle it. He told himself, "I'll find something soon. It's just a small break." But life was preparing him for a much deeper test. Bills started piling up. The electricity bill, the rent, the grocery expenses, everything demanded money that he no longer had. He tried to stretch the little savings left, but no matter how carefully he counted, it was never enough. He would open his wallet and stare at the thin notes, as if by looking longer, they might multiply. But reality never changed. Friends, too, were slipping away like sand from his hands. The same people who once laughed with him now made excuses. "Sorry, I'm busy," they said. Some promised to call back, but the calls never came. He realized people loved him only when he was useful, only when he had something to offer. Now, when he needed them most, he was invisible. One night, he scrolled through his phone, checking old messages. His chats were filled with plans, jokes, and late-night talks. He read them with a bitter smile. Those conversations once made him feel alive, but now they felt like memories of a world that no longer existed. The silence of his phone was louder than any noise. His body began to feel the weight of his worries. Sleep became a stranger. He would lie awake, staring into darkness, his heart racing with fear. Thoughts spun in his mind like a storm. What if I never recover? What if this is the end of me? He started selling small things from his house, his watch, his old guitar, even the television. Every object carried a memory, and letting them go was like cutting pieces of himself. Yet, he had no choice. Survival demanded sacrifice. But survival was not easy. One evening, his landlord came knocking on the door. The man's voice was cold, his eyes impatient. "Rent is due. If you can't pay, you must leave." The words stabbed him like a knife. He begged for more time, but the landlord shook his head. That night, he sat alone in the dark, holding his head in his hands. His home, which once felt safe, now felt like a ticking clock, counting down to the moment he would lose even this shelter. The world outside continued to move. People went to work, children played in parks, lights shone in cafes, but for him, time had stopped. He walked on crowded streets, yet felt completely invisible. No one saw his pain, no one cared for his struggle. He was surrounded by thousands, but he had never felt so alone. He tried to find odd jobs, anything to earn a little money. But rejection followed him everywhere. Some people laughed at his desperate face, others didn't even bother to answer. With each no, his hope sank deeper. Rain became his companion. He often walked under grey skies, his clothes soaked, his shoes heavy with water. Yet he did not complain. The rain hid his tears, and in those moments, he could cry without shame. Hunger became another cruel teacher. Once, he had eaten in fine restaurants, ordering without looking at prices. Now, he counted coins to buy the cheapest bread. Some nights, he went to sleep with an empty stomach, his body weak but his mind too tired to fight. The dominoes kept falling, one after another. First, his job. Then his friends. Then his money. Then his home. Piece by piece, life stripped him of everything. And with each loss, his soul grew heavier. But the cruelest part was not poverty, nor hunger, nor betrayal. The cruelest part was the voice inside his head that whispered, "You are finished. You are nothing now." And yet, somewhere deep inside, a tiny spark still survived. Weak, almost invisible, but alive. He didn't know it yet, but that spark would one day become a fire. For now, though, he was falling deeper into the pit. Rock bottom was waiting. The real question was, how much more could he lose before he finally broke? The knock on the door was louder this time. The landlord stood there, his patience gone. "You have 2 days. After that, you leave." His voice was sharp, final, like a judge announcing punishment. 2 days later, the room that once sheltered him was no longer his. He packed what little he had left into an old bag, some clothes, a pair of shoes, a few papers, and walked out. The door shut behind him with a heavy sound, a sound that told him, "You have lost your last safe place." Now, the streets became his home. At night, he searched for corners where he could sit, away from the eyes of people. Sometimes under a bridge, sometimes on a bench in the park. The cold ground was his bed, and the dark sky his ceiling. He wrapped his thin jacket around himself, but it was never enough. The nights cut through his skin like knives. Hunger was his constant companion. Days went by when he ate almost nothing. Sometimes a piece of bread, sometimes just water. His body grew weaker, his face thinner, his eyes hollow. Once, he had been full of energy, a man who walked with confidence. Now, he was a shadow of himself, moving slowly, as if carrying the weight of the world on his back. He watched life around him continue. People in clean clothes laughed with their families, cars rushed past him, shops glowed with bright lights. He felt invisible. He was standing in the middle of the world, but to everyone else, he did not exist. There were moments when the pain was too much. Sitting alone at night, his mind whispered dangerous thoughts. What is the point of living like this? Maybe it's better to end it all. His heart grew heavy, his chest tight. He felt trapped inside a prison of despair. One night, as he sat on the cold pavement, staring at the empty road, he asked himself, "Is this my destiny? To die like this, forgotten, nameless?" His hands shook, his eyes burned with tears. For a moment, he wanted to give up completely. But then, something unexpected happened. As he sat there, his eyes caught a small object lying on the ground near a streetlight. It was an old, torn notebook. Out of curiosity, he picked it up. Inside, there were pages filled with someone's handwriting. Words about struggle, pain, hope, and survival. Sentences like, "When you lose everything, you discover what truly matters." He didn't know who had written those words or why the notebook was left there, but as he read, he felt something shift inside him. It was as if the universe had handed him a message: you are not alone. Others have suffered. Others have survived. So can you. He closed the notebook and held it tightly to his chest. For the first time in months, he felt a small spark of hope. Weak, but real. That night, instead of drowning in despair, he whispered to himself, maybe this is not the end. Maybe this is just the beginning. Still, life did not magically become easier. The hunger, the cold, the loneliness, they were all still there. But now, he had something else too, a reason to keep moving. A reason to believe that maybe, just maybe, his story was not over. The man who had hit rock bottom now had a choice: stay broken, or rise again. What he did not know was that this small shift, this tiny flame of hope, would one day light the path to a completely new life. For now, though, he was still standing at the edge of darkness, looking for a way out. And the journey to climb back had just begun. The old notebook stayed with him like a silent friend. Wherever he went, he carried it in his bag. Whenever hopeless thoughts came, he opened it and read the words again. Those sentences, written by someone unknown, felt like whispers of strength in his darkest hours. One line echoed in his mind: when you lose everything, you discover what truly matters. At first, he did not understand it. How could losing everything ever be a gift? But slowly, he began to see. When he had money, a house, and friends, he never questioned life. He lived fast, careless, blind. Now, with nothing left, he was forced to see reality. He was forced to see himself. He realized he had spent years chasing things that never really mattered: status, approval, fake friendships. And now that they were gone, he asked himself, what is left? The answer was painful, but also powerful: me. I am left. And maybe that is enough. The first step of change came in small ways. One morning, he decided not to beg, not to sit quietly in the corner. Instead, he looked for work, any work. He found a small shop that needed someone to clean. The pay was almost nothing, but it was something. For the first time in months, he felt useful again. As he swept the dusty floors, he told himself, this is not my final place. This is just my first step. Days turned into weeks. He worked at the shop, saved small coins, and bought cheap food. His body grew stronger again, his face less pale. The hunger that once tortured him now taught him gratitude. Every piece of bread, every sip of water felt precious. But more than food or money, he was feeding something else: his mind. At night, when his shift ended, he read. Sometimes books from the library, sometimes the old notebook. Words became his teachers. He learned about patience, about inner strength, about rising after a fall. The world that once rejected him slowly began to look different. He started noticing little things: the sound of birds in the morning, the warmth of sunlight on his face, the kindness of strangers who smiled at him. These were things he had never valued before. Now, they felt like blessings. Still, the road was not easy. There were days when his past came back to haunt him. He would remember the laughter of fake friends, the comfort of his old home, and pain would stab him again. But instead of breaking, he whispered, they are gone for a reason. Maybe life is clearing space for something better. One evening, after work, he walked past a park and saw children playing. Their laughter filled the air, pure and free. For the first time in a long while, he smiled. It was small, almost hidden, but it was real. That smile was a sign: his heart was healing. He began to change not only outside, but inside. The anger, the bitterness, the self-pity, they slowly melted away. In their place grew patience, strength, and hope. He realized that happiness does not come from what you own, but from how you see life. The man who once thought of giving up now thought of building again. Not for money, not for fame, but for peace. One night, sitting under the stars, he whispered to himself, maybe losing everything was not the end. Maybe it was the beginning of the real me. That night, the sky looked different. The stars seemed brighter, the air felt lighter. For the first time, he truly believed he could rise again. The awakening had begun. But what would he do with this new strength? How would he use it to rebuild his broken life? That answer was still waiting in the days to come. The man who once walked with his head down was now learning to stand tall again. His steps were still slow, but they carried a new strength. Each morning, he woke with purpose. He was no longer just surviving, he was beginning to build. The small shop job gave him a little income, but more importantly, it gave him discipline. With every floor he cleaned, with every box he lifted, he told himself, this is not the end. This is my training ground. He saved whatever coins he could, no matter how little. Instead of spending his evenings in despair, he began to use them wisely. He borrowed books, attended free classes, and watched tutorials on old computers at the library. He wanted to learn new skills, to prepare for something bigger. Knowledge became his new treasure. Slowly, people started noticing him. The shopkeeper admired his honesty and hard work. Strangers respected his humility. Some even offered him small tasks outside the shop, helping with deliveries, fixing small things. Bit by bit, his circle began to grow again, not with fake friends, but with genuine people who saw his effort. One day, while cleaning, he remembered his old dream, something he had forgotten long ago. He had always wanted to start something of his own, a small business where he could create, not just serve. Back then, money and comfort had distracted him. But now, with nothing left to lose, he dared to dream again. He began planning, even if the plan was tiny. With his savings, he bought second-hand tools and started repairing things for neighbors, broken chairs, old radios, leaky pipes. It was not much, but people appreciated it. They paid him small amounts, and word spread. Soon, he was not just working in the shop, but also running his little repair service after hours. Each day brought new challenges, but also new victories. The man who once begged for food was now earning with his own hands. The taste of bread bought with his own hard work felt sweeter than any meal he had ever eaten in his rich days. More importantly, he was learning about real friendship. Unlike the people who had disappeared when he fell, the ones around him now respected him not for money, but for his character. A kind neighbor often brought him food. A local teacher shared books with him. A fellow worker encouraged him to keep going. These small acts of kindness built a network of support, stronger than the fake friendships he once had. But even as life improved, doubts still followed him like shadows. Some nights, he asked himself, what if I fail again? What if this new life collapses too? The fear was real, but he no longer allowed it to control him. He had already seen the worst. If he could survive the darkness, he could survive anything. The notebook, the one he had found in his lowest moment, remained his guide. Before sleeping, he often read one line again and again, "The greatest strength comes from the deepest pain." These words fueled him. They reminded him why he started, why he could not stop now. Months passed. His repair work grew. The shopkeeper, impressed by his progress, offered him more responsibilities. His income increased, his savings grew, and for the first time in a long time, he began to dream of having his own small shop one day. He was no longer the man who lost everything. He was the man who was building again, brick by brick, step by step, with patience and courage. But deep inside, he knew the journey was not complete. Something was still waiting for him. Something greater than just money or success. His losses had forced him to change. His pain had taught him lessons. And now, as he looked at the path ahead, he wondered, maybe all of this was leading me to a gift I could not yet see. The rebuilding had begun. But the greatest discovery was still ahead. Years had passed since the day he lost everything. The man who once walked through the streets with broken shoes and empty pockets was no longer the same. His clothes were simple, his life modest, but his eyes carried a light that no money could buy. He now ran a small repair shop of his own. It was nothing fancy, just a tiny space on a quiet street, but it was his. Every tool, every nail, Every repaired item told the story of his journey. Customers came not only for his work but also for the honesty and warmth he offered. People trusted him, something he valued more than gold. One evening, as he closed the shop, he sat outside and watched the sunset paint the sky. Children played nearby, their laughter echoing in the air. A neighbor waved and smiled at him. For the first time, he realized this was happiness. Not the false kind he once had, but the real kind that grows from peace inside the heart. He thought back to his past, the big job, the money, the so-called friends. At that time, he believed he had everything. But when life stripped it all away, he discovered how empty he truly was. Losing it all was painful, yes, but it forced him to rebuild himself from nothing. Now, he understood the meaning of the words he once read in that old notebook: when you lose everything, you discover what truly matters. He realized the greatest gift was not wealth or status. The greatest gift was freedom, the freedom from false people, false dreams, and false happiness. The gift was strength, the kind that comes only after you fall and rise again. The gift was wisdom, to value simple food, honest work, and true friendship. He smiled as he thought, if I had never lost everything, I would never have found myself. Sometimes, people passing by would ask about his story. They saw the quiet strength in his eyes and wondered where it came from. He never told them all the details, but he would say, life broke me, but that breaking was the making of me. At night, before sleeping, he still opened the old notebook. Its pages were torn, its ink fading, but its words still carried fire. He no longer read it out of desperation, he read it out of gratitude. It had been his guide in the storm, the light in his darkest night. The man who once thought of ending his life now lived each day with thankfulness. He was not rich in money, but he was rich in peace, in strength, in truth. And so, he understood, losing everything had been his greatest gift. Because in losing, he found. In breaking, he healed. In falling, he rose higher than before. The story that began with silence and emptiness ended with peace and meaning. And as he looked at the stars above, he whispered softly to himself, "Thank you for taking everything away. Without that, I would have never received the gift of a new life."